How's it going, everybody? So if you've got a barrel that's stuck on a Tikka Action, well, that's a problem that I had, and I can show you how I solved it with this tool that I made. It's an action wrench that goes on the outside of the action so you don't risk damaging the internals of your Tikka Action. So if you're interested and think that this is a tool that you need to have in your shop, I'll put a link or some contact info below where I can send you one. But if you're interested in seeing how and why I made this, then stick around, and that's what I'll cover in this video. Today we got a fun project in the shop. We had a new rifle show up. This one happens to be a Tikka. They're getting to be pretty popular, or have been popular, and for good reason. They're a nice, reliable action. There's really nothing to go wrong with them. They're smooth. People generally don't have any problems with them, and they're just a nice, solid rifle. There's not as much aftermarket support for them as like a Remington 700, but that's changing. They're getting to be a little better supported for chassis, stocks, and things like that. But yeah, nothing bad to say about them. So since we have plenty of equipment and I specialize around gunsmithing services, this Tikka that's chambered in 350 Legend is gonna be something else. Not sure what it's gonna be yet, but this 350 Legend barrel is gonna come off there. We might end up doing some work to the bolt or just get a different bolt face. But excited to work with this Tikka platform. So the first step for that project is gonna be getting the barrel off of the action. There's been plenty of reports from other smiths and just hobbyists in general. These barrels can be very, very tight in these actions. So with any project, what we don't want to have happen is damage any of our parts, especially the action. Traditionally, to remove a barrel, we would clamp the barrel in a vise with the appropriate size bushings, and then we just use a rear entry tool, which would replace where the bolt goes. So these lugs here that are on the bolt, which would normally ride in the action, we're going to use an action wrench that goes in place of the bolt, and then we can turn that. Now, if that works, that's great. There's plenty of actions that are meant to be removed that way. However, Tikkas can be very, very stuck. So if we don't want to damage any of the nice machine work on the inside of the action, a really good alternative is to clamp around the outside. And that's not a new trick. There's plenty of companies that make action wrenches for the Remington 700, Howas, Weatherbees, anything like that. But interestingly enough, I could not find an action wrench that goes on the outside of a Tikka Action, which is interesting because these barrels can be stuck quite often. So let's do the best we can to protect the inside mechanisms and machine surfaces of that action. And we're going to design a tool that goes around the outside of the action, behind the barrel threads, so we're not actually tightening over the threaded area while we're trying to loosen it, because that could kind of work against us. I got the barreled action off the stock here. Looks like we'll have some interesting geometry that we'll have to measure to get that wrench designed. When this thing's sitting in the stock, it looks like just a hexagon, but once we get it off, we can see that we actually have some radiuses, probably really difficult to see on camera. But this is round, goes to flat again. That radius goes all the way across the bottom here. Good news is looking like there's a little bit of this flat spot here in front of the action screw, or behind it. So that'll give us a nice spot to seat the wrench against to make sure we're staying away from the barrel threads. Just don't want to be clamping directly on top of those barrel threads as we're trying to turn it. Just as I mentioned earlier, that could kind of work against us, and we don't want to make our life any harder than it needs to be. But yeah, this looks like we've got a good place to put that wrench. And if you guys like spending too much on nifty stuff, Ouija does have a nice little holder, so you're not fighting those Allen keys all the time. Okay, so a little bit of mouse clicking, a little bit of rolling around. We've got the bottom half of the action wrench designed. as well as the top half. So just kind of a clamshell design. This will let us bolt this around the outside of the action. If you're wondering what these little reliefs are here, it's just gonna drill some holes before I cut the profile for the outside, because in reality, this comes to a square corner here, but I'm not able to cut that with a round cutter in the mill because it'll always leave the radius of the cutting tool. So by drilling first, that'll let us relieve the material there so that these sharp corners don't bind when this whole thing comes together. So that's looking all right. We'll give it a try. Left just a little bit of clearance so that we can put either some tape or something between the action and our wrench here to actually keep us from marring that outside surface, and a 1/2 inch square hole so we can use a torque wrench. Hopefully we don't have to use a breaker bar or anything like that, but this will let us actually put a little torque to this thing. So we'll get it cut on the mill and see how this thing works. I've got some test material loaded up in the mill, just 6061 that I had. I've used the part probe to touch off X, Y, and Z of the part, and used the tool setter to touch off all the tools. So let's see if we can make this action wrench. So the first op on this part's done. We've got the contour for the action there with our relief holes, and we've got that square hole for a 1/2 inch drive ratchet or torque wrench. We'll flip this around and get rid of that extra material. The machining turned out pretty good on the action wrench. I got the 1/2 inch hole. That's probably a little snug. It does go over the wrench or the body there. But I did notice I should probably move that farther away because the action gets really, really close. So depending on how big the head is on your ratchet, that could hit the action. So we can make that change, but the fit is really nice. Doesn't wiggle at all. This one's out of aluminum, just a test. Probably end up going steel just so we don't have stripped threads, and let guys do whatever they want for putting tape on the surface. But the fit is pretty darn nice. So we'll get some bushings made for our barrel vise, and then we'll test this thing out. This has not been loosened from the factory. We'll give it a shot and we'll see how this works out. And there we go. It actually worked. We'll get this taken off. This is just an aluminum test one. We'll see if I end up making it out of steel or not. But one nice part about aluminum is it won't mark up the action. So we'll see what this action looks like. I've had a little bit of time to use the action wrench and I made a couple changes. The biggest one is I got rid of the tapped holes. So rather than having to tap one of these pieces in order to tighten the bolts snugly around the action, I just machined a step and did through holes. So as I drop that in there, this step hits the hex on that bolt and now it can't turn. The other thing is I added clearance for a pick rail. So if you guys have a Tikka Action with an integrated rail on it, that clearance would allow you to use this on the action. So I think that's a big improvement. Having no threads in aluminum is good, but I like keeping this piece of aluminum because it lets me machine it quickly. And even if you guys aren't using tape or anything, it's not gonna mark up your action. So if you guys think that that's something useful you can have in your shop, please reach out. We'll get one in your hands. Thanks for watching, everybody.